are a high achieving woman who has found herself also needing to heal from any type of trauma and noticed how incredibly hard that is. Today's episode of Unlock Your Blocks is for you. My name is Elyssa Smith. I'm a trauma informed life strategist. And my guest today, Krystal Williams, knows exactly what this journey is like and is going to give us the hot goss on what it takes to actually overcome PTSD of all sorts as you are becoming someone who is setting yourself up for healing for generations. That stuff that has gone on in your family stops with you. This is your day today to listen to Krystal's story and to actually get to see how she's turned this into a superpower. Krystal Williams is a lawyer, entrepreneur, and self described healer of self and systems. I love that. Initially driven by a desire to overcome childhood trauma, she now realizes that those formative experiences prompted her to develop personal courage and professional skills that now support her work in driving change in the state of Maine's legal profession. In 2011, she thru hiked the Appalachian Trail, you guys. If you know anything about hiking, you know what a big old deal that is. And she goes by the cute little trail named Bumblebee, which I completely love. Krystal, thank you so much for being on the show today. And thank you for being willing to share some of your journey with us. I just know that this is going to change things for somebody that's listening today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you again.
Same. And you and I met a couple of months ago at a conference where we were on a panel together. And I just kind of I kind of just like attacked you today or before we started recording, like, can you share this? And can you share this? And can you, because what you shared on that panel about your personal journey to get to where you are today. You have your own law practice. You are working on your healing like a boss. You are bringing change and agency to other people that need a voice. What you're doing is incredible to my mind. And I would love for you to just share a little bit. I think it's also easy too for most of us to sort of be intimidated by what we see on paper with other high achievers and to not really understand that we are all these incredible works of beauty and process. And I appreciate you being willing. I checked with you before this that you're willing to share some of your kind of raw story about what it's taken for you to heal and get to where you are today. So, whatever you're comfortable sharing, I would love for you to let the listeners in on a little bit of what your process has been. What made you realize that trauma was going to be a piece of this for you to confront the trauma you had been through, and how you then pivoted to make the life that you have made right now?
Wow, that's a broad question, so I'm going to do my best to answer it. And I guess I want to also start by a little bit of a disclaimer because I am in the middle of a deep kind of breaking open of some things. And one of the things that I've noticed recently is that as I'm breaking through a really important kind of internal boundary that I've had, that the tears are flowing a lot more freely. If I tear up or if I get choked up, it's not that the wound is fresh, but it is finally being broken open to heal. And it is a very new experience for me, or yeah, because when I was very young, probably not even 10 years old, I made the decision to stop crying because what I learned from the environment that I was in was that crying doesn't actually help. People don't respond to it, so don't do it. And so now I find myself welling up quite frequently, and it's a beautiful sign of healing, but it's also very inconvenient at times. Just speaking very truthfully.
I completely understand that. And okay, so this is a safe space for tears, because tears are such a wonderful, and I know that you know a lot of this, but just for anybody who's listening, if you're also, or if you have been through times where it's just so inconvenient to be freaking crying all the time about the same stuff or new stuff or whatever it is, they actually have proven that tears have toxins in them and that you're actually releasing toxins when you cry. And that is part of why it's actually physically healing for us to be emotional, but also just in that emotional way of healing. It's such a, it can be such a barrier to progress when we have that wall up. But obviously, for you and for most of us, if you learned not to cry, or if you ever heard the phrase, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, like there's a lot that can happen when we're little that teaches our little soft hearts to be hard. And I am so honored to be catching you at a time in your journey where your heart is becoming softer and softer,
Mm.
and that you wanted to have a disclaimer like that. What a beautiful moment to step in and get a snapshot of what your life has been like and what's going on for you. So thank you for being willing to share anyway, and we will cry through it together.
Absolutely, I love that. Thank you so much. So, I guess a little bit about my story. I grew up in North Carolina. I'm one of 7 children. I am the oldest, female, the second oldest overall, but the oldest female, and there was just a lot for whatever reason, whatever divine grace or gift of the universe, however you wanna articulate it for yourself, I just had an awareness that there wasn't the dynamics in my family were off. And I just knew that at a young age and tried to talk to my parents about it, but they weren't open to that conversation. And there were a lot of bruises that I had as a kid. I will just give my parents the grace and say that it was unintentional or and they didn't know other ways of being. And also, I just, as a Black woman living in a low-income house, I grew up in a Habitat for Humanity community. There were just a lot of societal messages that I didn't know and I didn't have the skills or the information to protect myself from, to say, "These are not true. These are just vestiges of kind of a system of oppression, and that is not my reality. I don't have to accept these messages." So, as someone who is always who's curious, who looks for collaboration, who wants to be a part of something, just whatever the world told me about myself, even if it wasn't what I felt internally, even if it wasn't a positive message, and it most frequently wasn't, I just accepted it hook, line, and sinker. And it became part of my identity and something that I felt I needed to put energy into to kind of prove that it wasn't true, right? I now had this burden that it was my responsibility to convince the world that I was worthy of love, that I did have potential, that I was a good person, right? These core beliefs that we have. And because I didn't know another way to be, because I received these messages at such a young age, it was my normal. And so as a result of that, and because I am very passionate about saying I am a good person, I spent a lot of energy accruing all of the external points of validation. So I went to an incredibly good school, one of the top colleges in the nation. And not only did I go to that school, I double majored in math and psychology. So talk about like taking things to the max. And then from there, I was a Peace Corps volunteer and I served in the Dominican Republic for the full term of my Peace Corps service. I came back to the United States and I was working in an international public health consulting organization, working on projects in Africa. Then I went to, again, a top business school, one of the top in the nations, and then worked in a Fortune 100 company and I helped that company grow. All of these things, someone from the outside would look at and say, oh my gosh, this person has every advantage. If they say anything, it's probably going to be like from a position of arrogance and thinking that they know everything. Nothing could be further from the truth for me. Like I was walking around like internally just empty and just anxious all the time because all of those accolades and all of those accomplishments didn't translate to an actual sense of self-confidence and I don't know the right word, but feeling tethered and centered internally. I always felt very untethered. And then a series of things happened that in many ways kind of proved that I wasn't the right fit for the world. So my life kind of fell under, uh, the foundations of what I thought were my life crumbled. And I think Brene Brown said it wasn't like a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. But it was a little bit of a breakdown because I wasn't expecting to walk away from a well-paying job, to have my father die unexpectedly, to have my family, which my mother has a chronic mental illness, to have her now relying on me as her single well compensated daughter to kind of step into the care that my father was giving. So that was a lot of that, all of that happened within a 12-month period. And so I pivoted and moved to Maine, went to law school because that was already in the works. And as I was going through that process, I had this beautiful opportunity to say, like, what does it mean to be a Black woman in one of the whitest states in the United States at this point in my life? At that time, I was 40. So, no, this wasn't like early career. This was at a point where most people would look at me and say, you should kind of have your stuff together and know exactly who you are and what you want to do in life, professionally and personally. And I was in a point of incredible turmoil. And so I went through law school. I was working at a private firm here in Maine. And something wasn't working in life. I just couldn't understand how I could tell parts of my story, the things that I've done to other people. And they would have these amazing reactions of like, oh my gosh, that's so incredible. I can't believe you've done all that. Wow, that's so much life packed into such a short period of time. That's incredible. And then I would walk away feeling so, so empty. And so I started seeing on and off, I've seen therapists over the years. And because mental illness is a feature in my family, I was contemplating making a career shift and potentially going out on my own. And before doing that, I was talking with a therapist and I was like, you know what? I really want to have a psychiatric evaluation because I know the history of my family. And as a lawyer, like our tool, our skill set is our mind. And I was like, if my mind is broken, I need to know it because I'm putting all of my eggs in this career basket. And if the basket has got some big old holes in it, like that's not a winning strategy. So, um, so when I went to see the psychiatrist and she was amazing, and in the time that we had together, she was like, "Tell me your story." So I told her my story, and she just kind of looked at me and she was like, "I don't think this is the illness in my family is schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder." She was like, "This isn't what I'm hearing from you. What I am hearing is PTSD." And I was like, it is so strange to say I was relieved to hear that, but I was relieved to hear that in part because it was a professional validating things that I had been reading and thinking through on my own. So I should say that one of my degrees as an undergraduate was psychology. And at a fairly young age, I knew that I needed to heal and wanted to heal. I didn't know from what, but I just knew that, again, something in my family was off and I needed to move beyond that. So hearing this professional say, "You have PTSD," it gave me more of a focus and a way in to say, okay, this helps explain this constellation of symptoms that I've had that I've never been able to really put my finger on how to address. And it was because I was addressing a symptom and not the root issue. So today I'm at a place where I'm looking more at the root issues and trusting that some of the symptoms, which I think we'll talk about, will start to resolve themselves without me fighting so much against myself to try to push myself beyond kind of where I am right now.
Wow. You did exactly what I asked you to do so eloquently. Oh my gosh, for everyone listening, I literally just kind of tackled her before this interview and I was like, "So, can you tell your whole history and the realization of trauma and all the things that you've done and everything in the first 5 minutes?" She's like, "I'm gonna try." This is such a beautifully self-aware retelling of a sacred journey, and I so appreciate that you are sharing with us so vulnerably, and I really resonated with what you said about being relieved when PTSD was the diagnosis. There's a strong message that comes with trauma that it's not safe to talk about, look at it, the world is unsafe, we need to fight, flee, freeze, or fawn. And the fawn response is that, please your way to safety, right? And so if the message, I so loved how you captured this. Typically, the message from any kind of family dysfunction, mental illness, addiction in the family, all those things from a caregiver or from adult figures in our lives when we're little between the ages of 0 and 10, and you probably have this from your psychology background, which I love. I totally forgot that you had a psych degree, by the way. I'm like, this is a lawyer. And then you're like, yeah, and business and psychology. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. I forgot. Oh my goodness, talk about just like, pleasing your way to safety and getting to that next accolade to try and find the self-confidence and the belief. But any message we get in those first 10 years about we're not going to get a need met or we're trying to show emotion and it's not being met with care, or if it's, whatever, it just even just mild things such as, and I say mild with air quotes, you know, such as, you got an A, so you didn't get as much of a, an accolade or as much praise as you would have if you got an A plus. And maybe there's a question like, well, why wasn't it an A plus this time? Any message like that. And the little child brain, because the brain is not all developed during that time. That's, we're only partially partially cooked at that point. And the brain tells us it's you. You need to work harder, be better, and do more. And so bless your heart, as a little
Yeah,
tiny person, you're getting all these messages like we live in poverty. We have to, accept charity. We have to, this is who I am. I don't have any potential. And you chose to fight that by being more good, which is an interesting and very helpful survival mechanism, right? Because some people, what they choose, it's not a choice, it's not a cognitive choice, right? But what their system defaults to, depending on your role in the family lineup, is I'm going to act out, or I'm going to prove, there's no hope of me being good. So I'm just going to be as bad as I can, or I'm just not going to care. And yours was to be good, to try and prove I'm not what you think I am. But deep
yeah,
down, the person you're arguing is you. And
yeah.
so you get to that place in adulthood. And I got there too. In my 20s, I just realized, like, what am I even doing? You know, it's like this realization that I am so unhappy. And no matter how hard I work, it just leads to burnout, exhaustion, and a never ending list of what else I need to do to be more perfect. And so that place of either I gotta give up or I gotta find the root of this is a really excruciatingly beautiful place to be. And the fact that you were so relieved, like, oh my gosh, I knew it. I knew that this couldn't be because I'm defective.
Yeah.
But that is the message, right? When we're little kids, is I must be the problem because we can't
Mhm.
accept that we're living in an environment that we actually can't get our needs met. And we must just need to change to get
Mhm.
our needs. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's just a really painful but beautiful place that you found
Yeah.
yourself. And so once you had that sort of diagnosis of PTSD, what were your next steps? Obviously it was a relief, but now you've got this pile of trauma to deal with. Was it obvious to you where you needed to start, or how did you do that journey?
It wasn't obvious, and before I answer your question, I actually wanna touch on something that you just said, because when you gave the example of someone who might have gotten an A and not an A plus, and how that might have, they might have gotten the message from their surroundings that they weren't good enough, and you're absolutely right, because our brain at that age, when we get these incredibly devastating messages, we don't know how to translate them in a way that isn't egocentric, because we're children and children are egocentric, and that can be both a good and bad thing. And I really appreciated that example, because I'm well aware that yes, there are, and it's so interestingly so hard for me to still call myself a high achieving woman despite my resume, which is crazy. But there are women who come from backgrounds where there was more trauma than mine. I certainly had physical, emotional, and psychological abuse in my family. And there are even more horrific forms of in which that experience could take that I did not experience, and there are women who were able to overcome that and achieve amazing things in their lives. And there are other women who are on the other end of the spectrum where, objectively speaking, in the grand scheme of horribles that could happen to someone, they perhaps did not experience that parade of horribles, but what they experienced was deeply impactful and negative for where they were in the environment that they found themselves under. And I think that's such an important message. And I promise I will tie this back to the question that you asked me. It's such an important message, because trauma isn't about comparing horribles, right? Each of us have our own set of facts in our lives, and it is possible to experience trauma even in the most affluent, seemingly loving household, because what your parents or what your caregivers provided was not what you actually needed. And this is also allows us to step away from blaming people and just saying, like, they didn't understand or they did not know how to provide what I needed. And so there's going to be a gap because we're not the same people, right? There's going to be a gap. So how do I step into that space for myself?
That's such a wonderful point, and I'm so glad that you made that point because it is really important that when we look at trauma, and this is something that I try and talk about a lot, is when we think of trauma, we think of big T trauma, right? The big bad things that should never happen to anyone. But what people are sometimes surprised to figure out is like my life, no big T trauma when I was growing up. We were not wealthy, but like we had basically enough. We were on a tight budget when I was little, but I didn't really notice a lot about that. I got some bad money messages, which will be a whole other episode another day. But
We should have that conversation for sure.
yeah, right? That'll be our part 2. But it really was for me, it was like I got a prize, if I got a certain grade, and I just didn't get a prize if I got another grade. There was no, like, punishment. But my little brain, I was the hero, oldest daughter, like, it was like, I need this, and this is where I get the most attention, this is where I get," and so my little needs were going unmet despite my parents' best efforts. They loved me, they were trying, they had 0 experience with children before me, and it showed, it was like, God bless them, they've since apologized, and we're working on our relationship, but it's like that is such a good distinction. And I really appreciate you drawing attention to that because one of the things that I often get from high achieving clients who find me is, but it wasn't that bad. And we all have this idea in our mind of what was that bad. And it's never what we went through because our brain normalized it. Like, even if you had physical abuse in the household, well, maybe it wasn't you got attacked sometime, right? Maybe it was just small physical abuse. I'm using quotes
Mhm.
again. So it's like my version of trauma is different from every other person's version of trauma. And there's a definition out there floating around for trauma that says anything that overwhelms your senses in the moment to where your system has to go into the sympathetic nervous system response, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so it's like, okay, if that happens and your system can't shake it off, that was trauma and that qualifies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of why it was also really important for me to call that out is that now I have created a life for myself where I'm economically comfortable, my needs are met. And it was really hard for me to say, okay, I now have this diagnosis, but my circumstances are so much better than they were when I grew up. Why can't I just kind of transport myself into my current reality and be okay? Right? And it took me a while to really appreciate the deep roots of trauma. And for me, it is visually and conceptually helpful if I do think of, and bear with me for just a second, if I do think of myself as a plant or a tree with these deep roots, because I can now say, okay, it's not that the visible part of the tree is going through anything that is outrageous or, I'm blending in with the forest, if you will, but my roots are not healthy. And if I want to, keep my tree trunk and my branches strong, I've got to go back down to the roots and put them in different soil. And so that means I'm going to have to do a little bit of digging and I might have to do a little bit of snipping. And that's not going to be comfortable. And so the first thing I did, and this was years in the making, and I'm not saying that it is a right thing for everyone. But the first thing I did was I cut off contact with my mother. And it still brings tears to my eyes because it was not an easy decision. It is still not an easy decision. And I continue to think about ways that I can accelerate my healing so I can reach back out and establish a different connection with her. And the distance that I have from her now has, one, allowed me to begin to heal, but it's also given me such compassion for who she was as a person. So this is a woman who was born before the Civil Rights Act, who went to segregated schools, who grew up in a time where women were not allowed to be financially independent. And she found herself, well, it's very difficult to find yourself. She was pregnant by my dad at, I believe she was 19, and they got married. And then she had, that was my older brother. And then she had 6 more kids within like a 15-year period. And her dreams for herself were lost in that process. And the life that she and my dad thought they would have because he was on his way to be drafted by the NFL but got injured, like that life never came to fruition. And so they both found themselves in a circumstance where there were too many mouths to feed, not enough money coming in, and they both came from families that were very solidly middle class. And so there I believe there was some shame in that as well. And so the result is, for whatever reason, my mom looks at me and she sees someone who she feels like she needs to belittle in order to feel better about herself. And it hurts my heart every time what is that? There's that saying that like your parents know how to push all of your buttons because they're the ones that put them there.
Yes.
And, like, that is, like, so the truth, and one of the things that for me is, like, something that I grieve in my life is that I never married and had kids, and so when my mom knows what buttons to push, that puts me in a spiral of shame and grief, and so for my own healing, I had to just step away and say, like, "This is not a relationship that I can sustain right now." So that was the first thing I did, and there were ripples of other decisions that came from that one decision, but I can say that my life, my emotional internal life is so much more peaceful now because of that decision, because I also grew up as the caretaker for all of my siblings, especially once my mom was formally diagnosed and in and out of hospitals. And so my position in my family was the caretaker. Anytime anyone needed money, had a problem, was in a situation that they shouldn't have been in or that I was a person that they called. And so I was never able to really have peace or have stability because I was always the crisis manager for the whole family. And when you have a family of 6 siblings, you're in crisis all the time. So as difficult as that decision was, it was, and it continues to be difficult to this day. It was the right decision for me at this time in my life so I could give myself the chance to heal in a way that I've never had before.
That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. What an excruciating decision to have had to make, and it's so brave because there are so many people who are unable to, for whatever reason, to make that separation to give themselves the best chance at healing, and you're doing such a courageous thing by allowing that for yourself. It's so challenging when that's not the right word. There needs to be a stronger word for this, but when your identity is to be the fixer, especially when it is in every sense of the word, financially, emotionally, physically, logistically, for so many people, and that's your role. And we talk a lot about on the podcast here where there's a family mobile that we're all born into. You have
Mm,
your place. It's like the little animals that hang above a baby's crib.
yeah,
It's like, there's like the zebra and the giraffe and the
yeah,
elephant, and they all balance each other out. So whatever your role was that you were born into, you got that role because that needed to balance the family unit. That's our only in order to survive, kids have to balance the family unit. And whether that means that I'm caring for mom, I'm noticing when dad's showing signs of being angry and I got to get the kids quiet and I got to do this, or nobody's watching the kids need to eat, I need to feed the kids. All of those different things that can happen cause us to have in the fabric of our identity that I am help. Like I am to help.
yeah,
That's who I am. And then for you to realize as an adult, I can't actually get free enough of this identity, of the things that continue to keep coming to hurt me. You can't. One of the examples that I think is really helpful and has been for me is that if you're on the battlefield and there are shots flying, that is not the time to lay down and start nursing your wounds,
yeah,
right? When the shots are still flying at you. You have to actually get off the battlefield and go to the medic tent, and that's where it's safe to heal.
yeah,
So you're doing that for yourself. You're advocating for yourself, and I hear how hard that is for you, and I honor that, because what greater gift is there to the true self who is grieving a life that she didn't design. Most of us, when we start to find out what we really have been through with a new lens, it's devastating where we find ourselves. What decisions would I have made differently if I were more in tune, or if I were more healed, or just grief and losses and relationships that we never had, and families that we never built, and things like this. And it can just be so full of grief. But if you're realizing that and trying to heal from it while the shots are still flying, I mean, there's just not a chance, right? We're just going to bleed out right there on the battlefield. So I just want to honor the decision you've made for now. And I love how you keep rephrasing that. It's kind of like this is what's right for you in this moment of your life. and it continues to be hard and continues to be the right thing right now. So for anyone who's listening, we're I'm going to give Krystal in a moment a chance to offer some advice to somebody who's resonating with this story of healing. And I'm fairly confident her advice is not going to just be leave your family behind, just don't talk to your family of origin. Because if it were that easy, all of us would be doing that. And if it were helpful, then for everybody to do that, then, that would be wonderful. But, there are so many things that we each have to consider. And for this to have been the decision that was best for you is so honorable and so amazing and took so much strength and courage and still does. And I just wanted to take a moment and say that. So thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So my next question to you is we've alluded to this. You've alluded to this. But in being I'm calling you a high achieving woman, okay? There is no like this is you give your all, you give your best and you have done some incredible things, and I think also the term high achiever for me I use that for any woman who is driven by getting to that next level and continuing to improve on herself. And you certainly fit that bill. So, when you have looked back on all of these years of not realizing you were being driven by trauma, because it was hidden to you for a long time, what do you see in the way of where you might have been stopping yourself in that sort of self sabotagey way as your coping mechanism?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I will say that that there are quite a few. I developed a very complex coping strategy over the years, and I'm slowly peeling them all back. The through lines and looking is how I never allowed myself trying to think about how I want to phrase this, how I never allowed myself to truly lead. And what I mean by that is I constantly looked for situations where I could be someone's number 2 or number 3. I never kind of took the mantle on of being number 1 and all of that entails. And it really was a reflection of how I grew up and how my parents were very adamant that they were in charge and that I could only go so far. And so even as I was coming up professionally, and now I look back quite frankly and cringe a little bit because I'm like, "Ooh, they were my boss, not my dad." Like, this is just, like, so weird, like, now thinking about how much of my personal life I brought into the workplace, and this was different than being your true self at work. This was me working out personal trauma in the workplace because that was where my energy was. And yeah, I would say that is the biggest thing, and the biggest pivot in my healing process was when I started my own law firm because even though I didn't realize it, that was something inside of me saying, "I am now claiming the spot of being number 1 in my life." And whoa, did that, like, upset the apple cart, right? Like, it has been such a journey, like, I have not made like, this has been the point in my life where I've made the most strides, the most internal change because of that additional decision. Not only was I going to not be the crisis manager for other people, I was gonna step into the number 1 position in my own life, and wow, there's a lot that comes with that.
That is so incredible. I love that. And you know what? There are so many people listening right now that are identifying exactly with what you said, continuing to play small because of that ultimate self doubt that's still in there, that was instilled through those childhood beliefs that you are less than and you need to work harder, be better, and do more in
Yeah.
order to have value, in order to make meaning out of your life. So, what an incredible pivot to just be like,
Mm.
okay, stop. I am now the main character. I mean, what a beautiful moment in your life. And the fact that you have now seen so much movement. Do you find that, so A, you've been able to actually accomplish more since you started playing the main character
Mhm.
role instead of being the supporting lead? And B, have you noticed that are you able to get more into that confident mindset? Because the root of self-sabotage, perfectionism, procrastination, playing small, imposter syndrome, it's all rooted in self-doubt that is necessary to survive childhood messaging. So are you finding that the self-confidence piece is coming into place now?
It's is slowly moving there. It's not quite there yet. It's so interesting that we're having this conversation today, and I'm just going to I think this is the conversation I needed to have because I woke up this morning, like, doubting all of my life choices. I'm like, what am I doing?
That is okay. Can I just say, I just need to say, this is a part of being an entrepreneur, regularly waking up and doubting all of your life choices, especially if you were the hero daughter growing up and you started your own business as an adult. You are vibing with this so hard right now. If you're listening to this and that was your path, like everybody that's listening knows exactly what we're saying if that was your path. So I am so glad that we're having this conversation on one of the mornings for you where that is how you woke up. Cause I wake up that way on the regular and got to do my regulation stuff.
Mm-hmm. I will say, so this kind of goes back to the disclaimer I made at the beginning. I am one of the things that I realized, so was recently thinking about the team that I'm building around me, is that I'm still slipping back into that I'm going to play number two role to my team, all of whom are younger and not nearly, they don't have the skill set, the same skill set that I have at the same level of development, right? And so I'm so grateful that I went through that experience and had that realization recently because what that has allowed me to do was really part of, I would say, my superpower. And also what made me susceptible to some of the earlier messaging is how much I care for other people and how much I'm mindful of how I'm showing up and contributing to the collective well being. And once I realized that me playing small was actually putting my team in a position where they were not set up for success because I was abdicating my role of leader, that was like my wake up call. And so now I'm working through that for me internally. And that has led to me saying like, oh, I need to go deep. I need to go to even a deeper level of kind of where that messaging resides in me internally to do some more excavation. So there is now, I'm going to break this into two pieces. There is now more for me an acceptance of this is going to be a lifelong journey because, and I love how you said this before, I was born into a system and into an environment that perhaps my parents didn't intend to create, but what they created was incredibly damaging to me. And it was done at I experienced it at such a young age that it is part of my psychic DNA. And so it is unlikely. I don't like to speak limitations over people, but I also want to be realistic. It is unlikely that I will ever get rid of all of it, but I can put in more systems internally in place that will keep those areas in check and provide counter messaging when those areas are triggered. And that's what I'm really working on for myself right now. And what that has, realizing that has actually unblocked energy because now I'm not trying to force myself to be healed, right? I'm just saying this is the journey that I'm on. And so now that I'm no longer forcing myself to be quote unquote healed and just appreciating the journey and understanding what I need to do for myself to balance myself, it actually frees up energy for me to externally be what I've been acting, right? So that's where I am right now. So the confidence is not as embodied as I would like, but the seeds of it are there.
That is what a beautiful answer. I love how you answered that. That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And it's such a raw and vulnerable share too, because this is such a work in progress in all of us who are doing it. To actually reflect and let some light shine in and kind of let people know what's happening is like, don't walk in on me while I'm changing. Like I'm literally actually, you know, emotionally growing and changing here, and it's not going to look pretty, and that it's going to look a little bit messy. And thank you just for being willing to share all of that. Now, for someone listening today who's resonating with this, like, okay, I've got some self doubt going on. I think I have been playing small. I'm not embodying my full confidence. What would you recommend to her for her very first step? Like, what's a baby step that would be accessible for her from your
Mm.
experience?
That is such a great question. I would say the first step, or one of the first steps you can consider, is asking yourself, what is the next right thing or best thing for me to do? Because I think this is where, when you're at the beginning of your journey, as much as you will need to go inside and look at the internal roots at some point, knowing that you are at the beginning stages, sometimes it's important to get momentum to move in the direction that you know you need to go. And so part of that is like, what is the next right thing for me to do in the external world? Sometimes it's separating yourself from individuals who are triggering, removing yourselves from situations that no longer serve you, both of which I've done, beginning to curate your external experience so that it doesn't continue to trigger the unhealed parts of yourself. I think is really important to do. The other thing I would say is begin to bring these resources that will feed the healing that you are going through, right? So this podcast, another book that I've recently has been really helpful has been The Internal Family System. So the book No Bad Parts, really incredibly helpful. Yeah, that those are two like incredibly great first steps.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's so helpful. So, our last couple questions I ask every guest that I have on the show. What is your best go to song for pumping you up or giving you a reset when you need it?
Uh, it is Waka Waka by Shakira. I like love that song.
That's a good one. I love it. It's so good.
Yeah. Like yeah, the song is like both triumphant, but acknowledging like the fight and the journey and yeah, so
It
that's my
is. It's a
song.
hero's journey
It
song. It really
is.
is. I
It
love
really is.
that. It's
Yeah,
really beautiful and fun, just kind of upbeat and just nice to
exactly.
dance to. That's awesome. And then final question, if you just have a few minutes for doing something nurturing for yourself, what's your 5 minute or so go-to self-care?
Breathing. So eyes closed, feet on the ground, hand over heart, deep breaths.
So good. That's actually mine. That's my first thing too. If I don't have time to go and like do something, that is absolutely. And I think the feet on the ground part is an interesting thing to make sure that we say because it is really important to actually give the body a sense of safety, physically grounded. Actually having
Exactly.
our feet on the ground is really helpful. And even better if you're barefoot outside. Have you tried that? I
No,
like
I
that too.
haven't. Oh, I'll
It's
have to
really
do that.
nice. Yeah, barefoot outside in the grass is there's just something really grounding about that experience for the body as well. But yeah, just feet on the ground, and I love the deep breathing. I'm such a deep breath fan.
Have you done the Wim Hof? Have you done like Wim Hof breathing?
No, I haven't.
I'll have to send you so
Yes,
it's a specific way that you breathe in and out, and it oxygenates your blood in such an amazing way. I'll send you a couple of YouTube videos on it.
I love it. Yes, I love that. Wim Hof. Okay, very nice. Well, Crystal, thank you so much for coming on today and just sharing your beautiful, beautiful journey and being so vulnerable with me and the listeners. And I know that this has shifted something for at least one person listening. I know it's shifted something for me. So it's just such an honor to have been privy to your story. But part two and part three, we need to talk about your Appalachian Trail experience. We need to talk about money mindset. So we have so much more to cover. So hopefully we'll be able to have you back on soon. And where is the best place for people to find you if they want to follow along on your journey?
Yep, they can find me on Instagram at KWilliamsESQ Esquire, and on LinkedIn at Krystal D. Williams.
Excellent. And we'll have all of that in the show notes for everybody who's listening. And again, Crystal, thank you so much. What a lovely time we've had together. And I do hope that we'll be able to have you back on again. And everyone listening, if there's something about this that has really moved you or changed something or shifted, we would love to hear about it. You can always reach out to us in the comments and you can just let us know what spoke to you about this. We would love to hear from you. And until the next time we see you, take such good care of yourself.